Reef. How are you?
Hi Ed, how you doing?
I see that you're admiring our Erroll Garner collection.
Yes, I'm a jazz lover, and it's wonderful that Pittsburgh has Erroll Garner's collection.
It sure is. It arrived here in 2015, and since then we have been busy processing it and making it available to researchers.
I think our community will benefit greatly from having a collection here at the University of Pittsburgh.
Well, this is just a sampling of the types of material in the collection, from sound recordings to music scores to contracts to correspondence to photographs and publicity. Would you like to learn some more?
Yes, certainly.
All right, let's go on a tour.
Let's do it.
It's really wonderful to see you, and I know that you're a huge jazz fan, and particularly a huge fan of Erroll Garner. And in the archive, we have over 8,000 photographs documenting Erroll's career through his performances and his awards and just everything that shows Erroll's career. But I had a question about 4 photographs that I found, and I think you might be the person to answer these questions for me.
Okay, sounds good. I looked at the photographs when the collection originally arrived in 2015, and I found the collection to be rich with all kinds of photographs, personal photographs, professional photographs. I think the archive of photographs will offer researchers an additional tool to find out more information about Erroll Garner and his career, his life, and the associations he had.
So, what I was really curious about were these snapshots taken in Paris, 1948, when Erroll was in Europe on tour. And I was very struck by the photograph of this woman and Erroll. But I don't really know much about her, but I think you've done some research. Can you share that with me?
When I initially looked at the photographs, those were a set of photographs that I came across. So familiar with a lot of jazz musicians, but a couple of names were unfamiliar to me. And one was the woman in the photograph, whose name was Moon D. Reville. So I started to do some research on her and uncovered a fascinating story about a performer who I knew nothing about, but had connections close to us. And so that's how it started. I took the photographs and scanned them, made copies, and I came back to the library and I was able to start looking through some of our online resources, particularly our online historic newspapers. And so from the name of a person on the back of a photograph, I was able to sort of uncover a story of a performer who, like I said before, I had knew nothing about. Moon D. Reville was a performer from France. Her background was French Caribbean, so she grew up in France. She was a performer. She was part of the French underground movement during the war, Second World War. And she comes to the U.S. in 1945 to perform at the Cafe Society, which was a club in New York. There were 2, a Cafe Society downtown and an uptown. And so she comes, and we sort of track her history in the U.S. through our newspapers. Very fascinating story. She comes to the U.S., she begins performing at the Cafe Society, which was a club that was intended to present a wide variety of music, particularly African diaspora music. And she captures the attention of a famous photographer who does a photo spread of her that ran in Life magazine, April 1st, 1946. She gets in, there are a lot of I think there's some gender issues going on with her and the owner. And subsequently, she leaves the Cafe Society. She marries an American pianist, and she goes back to Paris, where she opens a restaurant, and she works with entertainers coming to Paris, and she gives them a place to play. And so I think Erroll Garner is at her place in 1948. We've also been able to look through his itinerary, and so we know in May of 1948 he's in Paris. It's a fascinating story.
Oh, it is. It is very tremendous. And by the looks of this photograph, she and Erroll were good friends.
Good friends. In one of the other photographs, there's two gentlemen.
This one?
Yeah. Gentleman named Jimmy, who we're still trying to identify. The other gentleman is a man by the name of Aaron Bridgers. Aaron Bridgers was a performer who played in Paris nightclubs, and he played at this particular restaurant. Closer to home, Aaron Bridgers was the partner of Billy Strayhorn, Pittsburgh's own. So there are all kinds of connections that a set of photographs can lend a student, a researcher, a jazz enthusiast to sort of explore what the photographs mean.
And with over 8,000 photographs in the Erroll Garner archive, I'm almost certain there are many, many stories to uncover.
Yes, yes indeed.
Hey, Reef, it's really great to have you come visit the archives and learn more about what's in the Erroll Garner archives. You know, one of the things I think is really cool about this particular archive of a recording artist is the fact that I think everybody kind of figures out that there's going to be things like photographs in them, publicity photographs. There's going to be things like recordings in them. But what a lot of people maybe don't recognize, and where I think this collection is highly valuable, is it documents a lot of aspects of the business side of the music industry, particularly Erroll Garner's own music company, Octave Music, or Octave Music. I'm not sure exactly which way people pronounce it. But I just think that all the contracts that are in there, and the correspondence and the telegrams from Martha Glazer, his manager, while he's on tour, and all of those kinds of contracts related to the recordings and stuff like that are a fascinating snapshot into this world of recording artists. So I'd like to show you some things out of it.
Sounds wonderful. Let's do it.
So here's some recording contracts that maybe you recognize some of these names. This first folder is from pretty famous, I think, jazz recording studio, Blue Note Records out of New York.
It's Blue Notes. Blue Notes, that's not a famous, it is the. It was one of the landmark recording companies where a lot of jazz artists, a man by the name of Alfred Lyon, who started it. So a lot of people came through Blue Notes. I grew up in a house with a lot of jazz records. And Blue Note was a name that we could identify very young.
And look, I mean, there's even Errol's signature on some of the correspondence and stuff like that. So this looks like it's mostly from the 1940s. So would that does that make sense to you as well?
Yeah, Erroll, one of the unique things about Erroll Garner is that his career spans the 40s, 50s, 60s, and part of the 70s. So you get to see how the recording industry functioned from behind the scenes at different stages. You know, we remember these are historic periods of our country, coming back from the Second World War, 50s, with civil rights movements. So there's a lot of things that are happening, and to see what the artist is doing behind the scenes gives us another snapshot of a very influential musician.
Looks like there's some of the recordings listed here too. Do any of those look familiar to you?
Yes, a number of them do. Duke for Dinner, Afterthoughts, Gaslight, Twisting the Cat's Tail, some very interesting names. Am I Blue? Yes. It also lists the alternatives, the alternative takes that would do it. A lot of times on jazz recordings, there's an alternative take that was done, and so they put that in the contract as well. That's fascinating to see. And here's Mr. Lyon, Alfred Lyon. Wow.
Alfred Lyon and Errol's signature right there on that document. That's great.
That's a document there. Wonderful.
Terrific. Well, this is one of the earlier ones that's in the collection, that's in the archive. Let me show you another one that's from a little bit later time period. This one's from Mercury, and so let's take a look and see what kind of. Oh, look at this. This must be having to do with some of the advances and stuff like that.
1940s, 49.
Oh, this is that early as well, huh? Royalties. Oh, so now we get a little bit of an idea of how much money somebody might have been making from the recordings.
1946.
And I think that Mercury goes even to a bit later. So here's some of the 50s from the correspondence, right?
So what's really exciting in the collection is all of these beautiful publicity photos that we have of Erroll with other musicians. You know, this one is Erroll Garner, Columbia recording artist. I mean, it also kind of helps us date when that photo was taken, because sometimes they're not dated. But if we know when he was with Columbia, we know it has to be within that time frame.
Right.
But we've got these great photos. Oh.
There's just hundreds and hundreds of photos.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
they were so good at documenting Garner just from every angle as part of the publicity machine behind
I
him.
love this one. Such a young man there.
You love it. I've got a tiny version of
I
it
get a
too.
tiny version.
Multiple.
Oh, that's so much fun.
Well, I mean, it's just one of the more amazing things about the archive. The archive just has so many different types of material. It's amazing. I mean, there's the visual materials like this, which are so fantastic for reissues and for presentations on Garner. But the archive also, it's so unique among jazz archives in terms of the breadth of what it has. And particularly in terms of some of the business documents that it's been, I could say as a jazz researcher, one of the hardest things to find is hard data on business transactions with jazz musicians.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Because in this collection with all of the business records, we get to see the royalty payouts, which were strictly confidential.
Right.
Even today, I hesitate. I go, oh, can someone really look at this?
Yeah.
I mean, they list everybody and what their payouts were across, different genres.
Right.
And you just go, oh boy, does Tammy Wynette really know how much she was making? I mean, because it's in the report. I mean, so we don't just see Erroll, we see Erroll in relationship, his royalties in relationship to what others were making.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting study.
Yeah.
And
it's a delicate question, but there's ethics underlying it on multiple levels.
Sure.
Because on one hand, you do have to be careful about releasing private information about anyone. On the other hand, the fact that these numbers were all kept secret is part of the story of how musicians were taken advantage of at various times.
Sure. And why they fought to create Octave,
Right.
so that they could, control some of that.
Yeah. So it just provides a really fascinating window into the way that the jazz business worked for one of its most prominent artists. The collection also has incredible amounts of press coverage of Garner. That Glaser would save clippings for anything that she would find.
Right.
And so when you start digging through all of this material.
And this is across a variety of publications
That's right.
around the country and around the world.
Among the variety of documents highlighting his career and work, the Erroll Garner Archive is fortunate to contain an equally remarkable collection of audiovisual materials. There are 119 films and videotapes of Garner in action as he performed on shows such as The Gary Moore Show, The Ed Sullivan Show, and of course The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, who was also a huge fan. In addition to the moving images, all of the over 1,300 original master recordings containing more than 8,300 tracks for every Erroll Garner album released, live recordings, and tracks that never made it to the public ear are held. Yes, the master reel for Concert by the Sea is among those audio gems.